My name is Jake, and I used to believe that families had a kind of invisible balance, a quiet set of rules that nobody said out loud but everybody felt, the way a table feels stable even if you never look at its legs because you assume without thinking that something so ordinary must be built on fairness. I believed that for years. Not because my parents were perfect and not because my brother and I were close, but because life was busy, and when life is busy you don't interrogate the small discomforts, you file them away under that's just how things are. You tell yourself that love is messy, that adults have favorites without meaning to, that everyone has their own way of showing appreciation, and if you're the reliable one, the strong one, the easy kid, then you don't take it personally when the attention goes elsewhere. I was that kid, and I became that adult. For the last 5 years, I helped my parents keep their house. Not in a dramatic, heroic way where I handed them stacks of cash like some rich savior, but in the quiet, ordinary way that actually keeps people afloat. I took on part of the mortgage when interest rates crept up and they started doing that thing where they'd sigh at the kitchen table and stare at bills as if staring hard enough would make the numbers smaller. I covered the property taxes when my dad's hours got cut. I bought groceries when my mom's car needed repairs. I handled repairs around the place because I was the one who had the tools, the one who could watch a tutorial and do it right the first time, the one who never said not my problem because it felt cruel to say that to the people who raised you. And every time I did it, every single time, I told myself the same thing. This is temporary, they'll get back on their feet, families take care of each other, and when the time comes, when they're gone, when everything is settled, the story will make sense. My brother Eric lived 10 minutes away. He also lived 10 minutes away from adulthood, but he never seemed to arrive. He was 28 and he had mastered a particular kind of survival that looks like charm from a distance and looks like rot up close. He could show up at my parents' house with a grin and an excuse and leave with a bag of groceries. He could talk about figuring things out, the way some people talk about starting a diet, always Monday, always soon, always after this one last weekend, and my parents would nod like they were listening to a plan instead of a loop. When he needed money, my mom called it help. When he needed another chance, my dad called it time. When he needed someone to blame, they called it stress. As if life itself was bullying him and the rest of us were expected to pay the ransom. I didn't hate him, not in a clean, simple way because hate requires a kind of focus, and I didn't have the energy for that. Mostly, I felt tired around him, like being in the same room meant my body was bracing for something. A joke that wasn't funny. A comment that slid under your skin. A request disguised as a casual remark. If I'm being honest, I also felt something worse than anger. I felt replaceable. Not in the way you feel replaceable at a job where you can quit and walk away, but in the way you feel replaceable in a family, where the thought itself feels shameful because you're not supposed to measure love like that, you're not supposed to compare, and yet the comparisons happen in your head anyway, quietly, uninvited, stacking up until you stop being able to ignore them. Still, I kept showing up. I kept paying. I kept fixing. And the weird thing is, I didn't feel like a saint. I felt like the default option. The day everything snapped didn't come with a dramatic announcement. No sit-down conversation, no solemn "we need to talk." No gentle warning that would have at least given me the dignity of preparation. It came the way betrayals often come in real life, not as an explosion, but as a small door left open, a paper left where it shouldn't be, a moment of carelessness that reveals what people have been careful about for years. It happened on a Tuesday. A plain Tuesday. I was at my parents' house because my dad asked me to help with paperwork. My mom had bought a new scanner, one of those easy devices that comes with a manual written like a riddle, and my dad, as usual, was overwhelmed by the idea that a machine could require steps. He wanted me to scan some documents for an insurance claim, and I didn't even consider saying no, because saying no would have meant listening to them struggle and sigh and complain about how hard everything was, and I had learned slowly, painfully, that I'd rather do the thing than watch them drown in it. I set the scanner up on their desk. I opened folders. I stacked pages. I did what I always did, moving through their life like a quiet employee, smoothing wrinkles and problems they shouldn't have let get this bad in the first place. That's when I saw it. A folder with a neat label, estate plan. Under it, another last will and testament. I didn't reach for it like a thief. I reached for it like a son who had been paying bills for half a decade and had the right, at minimum, to know what kind of future he was financing. Curiosity isn't always casual. Sometimes it's a survival instinct. I opened the folder, and the words that greeted me weren't complicated legal language. Not at first, just the blunt shape of intent. The kind of intent you can feel in your bones even before you fully understand what you're reading. Everything was going to Eric. The house, their savings, their investments, what little they had, their assets. The word that always sounds colder than it should when it's attached to people you love. And me? There was one line, a generic sentence that felt like it was written by someone who didn't know my face. Something about loving both sons equally. Something about trusting that Jacob is self-sufficient. Something about being grateful for my support. Self-sufficient. As if I were a machine. As if I didn't need anything. As if being capable was a reason to be excluded. I sat there staring at the page, and it wasn't rage that came first, not the satisfying kind of rage you imagine, the kind that lets you slam doors and feel righteous. What came first was a hollow sinking sensation, like the air had been sucked out of my chest, like my body had discovered, faster than my mind, that something essential had been taken away. Felt like humiliation, because in that moment, every check I'd written, every repair I'd done, every grocery bag I'd carried, every late-night call I'd answered, all of it rearranged itself into a new shape, and that shape was not good son, not reliable, not loving. That shape was useful. And in my family, usefulness had always been my role. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that the scanner went idle and the little light blinked like it was waiting for me to return to my assigned task. Long enough that my hands started to tremble, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet disbelief that felt like nausea. My dad walked in and saw me not moving. "Jake," he said, casual at first, impatient in the second syllable. "What's taking so long?" I lifted the will and I didn't hide it because the part of me that still believed in fairness wanted them to see it, wanted them to correct it, wanted them to laugh and say, "That's not the final version." Wanted them to give me anything that would stop my brain from rewriting the past in real time. "So," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded, like my body had gone cold to protect itself. "This is how it is." My dad's face changed in a way I will never forget. It wasn't shock that I'd found it, not really. It was the look someone makes when their secret is inconveniently discovered, the look of a person who had counted on the fact that you wouldn't look too closely. He exhaled like I was a problem he didn't have time for. "Jake," he said, "it's not what you think." "What I think?" I replied, and now my voice had an edge that I didn't bother to soften. "Is that I've been paying your mortgage, helping with your groceries, fixing this house, and you still decided I get nothing." He looked away for half a second, the way people do when they're searching for a response that sounds reasonable. "It's complicated," he said. 2 words. No apology. No explanation. Just a phrase that meant, in practice, "Please stop making me uncomfortable and go back to being useful." My mom walked in then, drawn by the tension like a magnet. She took one look at my face, at the paper in my hand, and her mouth tightened, not in surprise, but in something closer to guilt, the kind of guilt people feel when they believe they had no choice. "Jake," she said softly, like she was approaching a wild animal. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I held the paper out, and the words felt heavier than they were. She read the first lines, and I watched her eyes move. Then she looked up at me and said the sentence that made the world tilt. "Honey, you don't need the inheritance." She said it gently, as if she were being kind. "You have a good job. You're independent. Eric, he struggles. We just want to make sure he's taken care of." That's when the real betrayal landed. Not the will. Not the money. The way she said it, the assumption beneath it, the logic that had apparently been running quietly in their minds for years. Jake will be fine because Jake always is, and Eric will fall apart if we don't hold him up. So Jake can be the foundation and Eric can be the house, and no one has to feel guilty because we can call it love. Something inside me didn't snap like a stick. Collapsed like a ceiling. I set the paper down on the desk, slowly, carefully, because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of dramatic anger, the kind they could dismiss as childish. "Got it?" I said, and my calm voice frightened even me. "Now I understand where I stand." My mom reached for me, her hand hovering, uncertain, like she wasn't sure she had the right to touch me. "Jake, don't." But I was already walking out. I left their house without slamming the door. I didn't need the noise. The silence was loud enough. For 2 weeks, I didn't go back. I didn't call. I didn't check in. I did something that felt unnatural, like forcing a muscle to move in a new direction. I let them handle their own life. I stopped paying the mortgage. I stopped covering the taxes. I stopped answering those quick questions that were never quick, never just questions, always a request in disguise. At first, I think they assumed I'd come back. They were used to my anger being temporary, the kind of anger that burned hot and then cooled into compliance because that's what it had always done. I would be upset, I would withdraw for a day or two, then I would return because I couldn't stand the thought of them struggling. They didn't understand that this time it wasn't anger. It was clarity. On the 15th day, my dad texted me, "Property taxes are due." No greeting. No apology. No, "How are you?" Just a bill delivered like a command. I stared at the message for a long time, and I felt something close to laughter, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable it was almost comforting, like watching an old movie you've seen 100 times and realizing you know every line. I typed back, "I'm sure Eric will handle it, since the house is his." Took 5 minutes for my mom to call. I let it ring, watching the screen flash her name like a warning. Then she texted, "Jake, please don't be like this. We need to talk." Now they needed to talk. Now that the consequences had arrived. I waited an hour before replying, not to punish them, but to prove to myself that I could. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice." That evening, Eric texted me. I saw his name and felt my jaw tighten automatically, like my body was bracing for impact. "Dude, why are you being such a drama queen? It's not a big deal. Just help them out like you always do." A drama queen. I read it twice, letting the entitlement sink in, letting the absurdity of being lectured by a man who had built his life on other people's labor settle into my stomach. I typed back, "You've got it covered. You're the favorite." He replied, "Oh my God, are you seriously mad about the will? Grow up. It's just money. Just money." When it was his. That hypocrisy was so clean, so effortless, that it almost impressed me. I wrote, "If it's just money, you won't mind paying the mortgage." No response. A few minutes later, my mom texted again, switching tactics the way she always did when the first approach failed. "Jake, we are your parents. Family takes care of each other. We did so much for you growing up, and now you're just abandoning us." Abandoning them. As if my entire adult life hadn't been a long series of small abandonments of myself. I replied, "You made it clear I'm not family when you left me out of the will. Eric can take care of you." My dad followed, and his message was the one that turned my stomach, because it was pure accusation dressed as morality. "We're not asking for much. Just enough to cover the mortgage for a few months until we figure things out. Don't be selfish." Selfish. I stared at that word and felt something settle in me, something steady and cold, because for the first time I saw the story they'd been telling themselves. I was not a son in their mind, not really. I was a resource, and resources don't get to have feelings. I typed, "No, I'm done," and I turned off my phone. The next morning, I woke up to a bank transfer request from my mom. No message. No explanation. Just a request for $3,500, like I was a vending machine and she had pressed the button she always pressed. I declined it. 5 minutes later, she called. I didn't answer. Then she texted, "I know you saw the request. Why did you decline it?" I responded, "Because it's not my responsibility. Ask Eric." She texted, "We're going to lose the house." My dad texted, "Are you really going to let your parents become homeless?" And for the first time, I laughed out loud in my empty kitchen, not because I felt joy, but because the manipulation was so blatant it stripped itself of power. They weren't going to become homeless, they just didn't want to sacrifice their own comfort. They didn't want to dip into their savings because they were used to me being the buffer between them and reality. Eric texted later, "Just send them the money already. You're making this bigger than it is." I wrote back, "Why don't you send it? You're inheriting everything." His reply came fast. "You know I don't have that kind of cash." And there it was. The truth, unpolished. He couldn't do what I'd been doing for years, and he didn't even feel shame saying it. "Then figure it out," I typed. "You're the one they chose." I expected the drama to fade after that because I thought surely they would understand I wasn't coming back. I underestimated how far people will go when they believe they are entitled to you. I was at work when my building's front desk called me. Jake? The receptionist said, hesitant, like she knew she was delivering bad news. Your parents are here. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like falling. They're saying it's an emergency, she added. They said you won't answer your calls. I closed my eyes, breathed in, and felt the old reflex rising. Fix it, handle it, make it easier. I forced it down. Don't let them up, I said. There was an awkward pause. They're being kind of pushy. I don't care, I said, and my voice sounded strange to me. Calm in a way I'd never been with my parents. They can leave. I hung up. A moment later, my mom texted, "We're downstairs. Open the door." Another text, "We're not leaving until you talk to us." I stared at the messages and realized something that made my throat tighten. They didn't see me as a person who could say no. They saw me as a locked door, and they believed that if they banged hard enough, the door would open because it always had. I left my desk and went downstairs. Not to rescue them, to end it. When I stepped into the lobby, I saw them immediately. My mom with her arms crossed, her face set in that familiar expression of wounded authority. My dad standing stiff, hands in pockets, irritated that he had been forced to show up in person. And Eric beside them, looking bored, like this whole thing was a minor inconvenience, like he wasn't the reason any of it existed. My mom's face lit up when she saw me. Relief and indignation tangled together. "Jake," she said, and her voice was too loud in the quiet lobby. "Finally, we need to talk." I didn't hug her. I didn't ask if they were okay. I looked at them the way you look at strangers who think they know you. "No," I said. "You need to leave." My mom blinked, genuinely confused. "Excuse me? You heard me." I kept my voice low, because I wasn't performing for the lobby. "You don't get to show up here demanding money like I'm your employee." My dad scoffed. "Are you really going to let us lose the house over a petty grudge?" The word petty hit like a slap. Not because it hurt, but because it revealed how small they believed my pain was. "Petty?" I repeated, and I nodded slowly, letting the word hang there like smoke. "You decided I was good enough to pay your bills but not good enough to be included in your will. That's not petty. That's a message." My mom stepped forward, softer now, switching again. "We only did what we thought was best for the family." I glanced at Eric. "Best for the family," I said. "Or best for him?" "Jake," she pleaded. "You're twisting this." "No," I said. "I'm finally seeing it straight." Eric sighed dramatically. "I don't even want to be involved," he muttered. "I didn't ask for this." That was the moment my restraint cracked. Not into yelling, but into truth. "You didn't ask for it?" I said, my voice sharp now. "Because you've never had to ask. You just take. You take their money, their attention, their excuses, and when it's time for responsibility, you vanish." His face flushed. "Dude, what the hell? You're 28. I cut in. "Get a job. If you're going to inherit the house, start acting like someone who can keep it." My mom gasped, as if I'd said something cruel instead of obvious. "He's your brother," she said, "and I've supported him longer than you have." I replied, and I surprised myself with how true it sounded, how heavy it felt to say out loud. My dad's jaw clenched. "You're being selfish," he said again, like it was the only weapon he had. I didn't argue. I just looked at him and said, "Do you hear yourself?" He frowned, not understanding. "You spent years letting me pay for your life?" I continued, slower now, because I wanted the words to land. "You made a plan where Eric gets everything and I get nothing, and you still expected me to keep paying. That's not family. That's extraction." My mom's voice trembled. "We thought you'd understand." And there it was again. That word. Understand. The word that meant, accept it, swallow it, don't make us uncomfortable. I looked at her for a long moment, and the lobby felt too bright, too normal for what was happening. "I do understand," I said finally. "I understand that you didn't do this because you hate me. You did it because you decided my love was dependable and his was fragile, and you thought you could build a future on my dependability without ever needing to give me anything back." My mom's eyes filled with tears. My dad looked away. Eric said nothing. And in that silence, I felt the real grief rise, not anger, not triumph, but grief, because for a split second I could see the entire shape of my life with them. And it wasn't a story of love, it was a story of roles, and my role had always been the one that carried weight quietly. Leave, I said, and my voice softened, not because I forgave them, but because I was tired. Go home. Figure it out. Ask Eric. Use your savings. Do whatever you need to do. But you're not using me anymore. My mom opened her mouth. I held up a hand. If you say family takes care of each other one more time, I said quietly, I'm going to ask you why you didn't take care of me. She froze. My dad swallowed. Eric stared at the floor. I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't slam doors. I just left them standing there with the first real consequence they'd ever had to hold. That night, they went to Facebook. Of course they did. It was the modern version of shouting across the neighborhood fence, the public performance of private righteousness. My mom posted vague lines about raising children who forget their values, about selfishness, about how some people turn their backs on the ones who sacrificed for them. My dad shared it, adding his own stiff comment about loyalty. Eric posted something about love and sacrifice, about being there for your parents, the kind of post that would make strangers think he was a saint. People commented. Some of my parents' friends scolded me without tagging me, which was somehow worse, because it felt like gossip dressed as virtue. A few cousins messaged me asking what happened, their curiosity disguised as concern. I stared at the posts for a long time, and I felt the old panic rise again. Fix it, correct the narrative, prove you're not the villain. Then I realized something that felt like freedom. I didn't need to prove anything to people who would believe a vague Facebook post over a decade of my actual behavior. Still, I also knew I couldn't let my parents rewrite reality entirely. Not because I cared about the comments, because I cared about my own mind. So I wrote one post. Not angry, not long, just true. I explained that I had supported them financially for years, that I discovered their estate plan by accident, that I was excluded entirely while my brother inherited everything, and that I had chosen to step back because love without respect becomes a job. I didn't insult them. I didn't attack Eric. I simply wrote, I have spent years being the one who holds things together, and I'm done being treated like a wallet. Then I logged off. The next day, my phone filled with messages anyway, because of course it did. My mom sent voice notes full of trembling grief. My dad sent short lines about betrayal. Eric called me names that sounded like frustration wearing a cheap mask. I didn't answer. I didn't respond. I blocked them one by one, not with glee, not with revenge, but with a strange sadness, because blocking your parents doesn't feel like winning. It feels like admitting that something you hoped would be different never will be. Weeks passed, then months. My parents stopped trying to get money out of me, not because they understood, but because they learned that pressure no longer worked. Eric, I heard through a cousin, had started doing odd jobs, which meant, in the language of our family, that he had finally been forced into adulthood by the lack of my financial cushioning. My parents, I heard, dipped into savings. The house remained theirs, for now. Nothing exploded. Nothing resolved neatly. Real life rarely does. What changed was quieter than that. What changed was me. I began to notice how my body felt when my phone buzzed, how my shoulders had been permanently raised for years, bracing for the next request, the next guilt trip, the next emergency that was only an emergency because they wanted it to be. I began to understand that love isn't proven by how much you endure. It's proven by whether the people who say they love you can see you as a human being, not just a solution. And the hardest truth, the one I had resisted for most of my adult life, was this. My parents did love me in their way, but their love had conditions that were invisible until I tried to step outside them. And the moment I stepped outside, I became the villain because my value to them was not who I was, it was what I provided. That realization didn't make me feel powerful. It made me feel strangely calm. Because when you finally see the shape of a thing clearly, it stops haunting you in the dark. I still have moments late at night when I think about the boy I used to be, the kid who tried to earn fairness by being good, by being easy, by being the one who never caused problems, and I wish I could reach back through time and tell him something that would have saved him years of slow erosion. I would tell him, if you become the dependable one, be careful, because some people will build their entire life on your dependability and call it love, And then, when you ask for a place in the house you helped hold up, they will look at you like you're being unreasonable, like you're asking for too much, like you should be grateful just to stand in the doorway. I didn't lose my family in one day. I lost the version of them I had invented in my head, the version that was fair, the version that would eventually recognize me. And in losing that version, I gained something else. I gained my life back. Not in a dramatic, triumphant way, not with fireworks or revenge, but with a quiet return to myself, the kind of return that feels like exhaling after holding your breath for so long you forgot you were holding it. Sometimes, freedom looks like emptiness at first. Sometimes it looks like peace. Most nights, it looks like silence. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of no longer being on call for people who only remember you when they need something. And when I think about the will now, when I think about that piece of paper that made my stomach drop, I don't think about money. I think about the sentence my mother said, soft as a lullaby and sharp as a knife. You don't need the inheritance. Maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't. What I needed was to know, finally, what kind of love I had been living inside. And now that I know, I can't unknow it. Some stories don't end with apologies. They end with understanding. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. Thank you for listening. This was Block Tales.